Hi guy, welcome back TV Spoilers. If there's one thing that always lingers with me when I watch The Young and the Restless, it's how the show can turn a happy piece of news into the cruelest test of trust. So the idea of Lily discovering she's pregnant doesn't make me cheer in a simple, romantic way. Instead, it pulls a heavy fog of unease over everything, as if every choice she makes from that moment forward will carry consequences she can't take back. The worst part isn't the pregnancy itself, it's the timing. It happens just as Lily is trying to step away from Kane to reclaim her breathing room. Just as she has accepted that her warning "you haven't changed" wasn't a line spoken in anger, but a conclusion shaped by too many disappointments. And it happens just as Kane is being drawn deeper into the kind of darkness Phyllis knows how to frame as power. In that context, pregnancy can become a psychological trap. Lily could be pulled back into Kane's orbit, even if she doesn't want to be, forced to negotiate with the past instead of being allowed to move into the future. I also feel another fear hovering close to something ordinary but merciless: silence. When Lily stares at that test, she can probably hear her heartbeat, yet she has no idea what or who she can safely believe in anymore. And in Genoa City, where secrets are never truly private, the next terrible possibility is that the truth gets exposed in a way Lily cannot control, turning her body and her choices into gossip, into leverage, into a weapon in someone else's war. Even if Lily tries to keep it to herself, she'll be living under sustained tension, waking up each day asking, am I protecting this baby? Or am I punishing myself because I'm afraid to face what comes next? Another ugly layer is how a pregnancy can be misunderstood. Kane might see it as a redemption opportunity, as a sign of fate demanding Lily return, and that interpretation alone could suffocate her. Because Lily knows a child is not a bandage for a man who refuses to change. And if Kane truly has feelings for Phyllis, the story becomes even more painful. Because Lily won't only be confronting loneliness, she'll be confronting the risk of being reduced to the cruel stereotype of a woman getting pregnant to keep a man. A judgment I believe Lily would hate, because she has always been the kind of person who wants to stand on dignity, not desperation. So would Lily tell Kane? I think she would be torn so deeply that even the audience would feel exhausted on her behalf. Because both choices carry a price. If she tells him, she gives Kane the right to step back into her life. And she gives Phyllis a reason to push herself further into the center, whether through sympathy, curiosity, or the hunger for control. If she doesn't tell him, Lily carries everything alone, and when the truth finally erupts, it will explode louder. With Kane claiming the role of victim, that Lily stole something from him, I can imagine Lily weighing this not through impulse but through a cold kind of logic, rooted in safety. Kane near Phyllis means Kane is in a danger zone, a place where morality bends under ambition, where people can start treating everything given Lovey as a tool. Lily would ask herself, if I tell him, am I bringing this baby closer to a man who is spiraling? If I stay silent, am I isolating myself so completely that I lose the chance to become a mother in peace? And what cuts me the most is that I understand both instincts. Sometimes we don't keep quiet because we want a secret to keep quiet, because we're trying to preserve the last clean, beautiful version of a relationship in our memory, terrified that once we speak, everything will be stained by calculation and selfishness. But Y&R never gives its characters an easy, pretty choice. I suspect Lily will choose something in the middle. She won't tell him immediately, but she won't hide forever either. She will watch Kane one more time, and not because she's hoping he'll change, but because she needs confirmation that she's not clinging to illusions. She'll observe how Kane reacts when Phyllis's push starts producing consequences. Whether he still knows how to stop, whether he still knows how to fear for the people he claims to love, or whether he only fears losing control. In the meantime, Lily will live with a feeling that is painfully real. Something most of us recognize, the sensation of standing in front of a door, hand on the knob, not knowing whether what waits behind it is light or a cliff. If I had one selfish wish for Lily, it would be this: that she gets to feel joy without paying for it by shrinking herself. But because this is Genoa City, I'm also afraid the pregnancy will become the harshest test of all testing. Whether Lily can set a boundary with Kane that doesn't collapse, and testing whether Kane can choose what is right instead of what is easy. Maybe Lily will tell him, but not to pull him back. Maybe Lily will stay quiet, but not to run away. And that uncertainty is what makes it so compelling. Because the real question isn't only will she tell him or not, but when will she tell him? And which Kane will she be speaking to? The Kane who still belongs to family? Or the Kane who belongs to Phyllis? Or the Kane shaped by the darkness Lily recognized a long time ago, yet still can't stop grieving now that it's becoming undeniable? Lily's advice didn't land as a passing reproach. It arrives like a mirror held straight in front of Kane, cold, direct, and impossible to soften. She looked at him with the kind of clarity he always tried to outrun. He hadn't changed. Kane heard the words, but he didn't truly take them in. In his mind, they felt like an overly harsh verdict. A way for Lily to protect herself rather than an honest reading of who he was. And that refusal, quite stubborn, defensive, became the real starting point of everything that followed. Not an elaborate scheme, not a single explosive betrayal. But the moment Kane decided to treat a warning as an insult, then silently vowed to prove her wrong by choosing the worst possible path. Lily left Genoa City with a finality that suggested she was done standing at the same crossroads. While Kane kept making the same choice, Kane told himself she only needed time, that if he stayed persistent enough, their family could still be repaired. But beneath that self-soothing story was something sharper, the feeling of being abandoned, of being denied the right to make it right that he always believed he deserved. Lily's departure wasn't only a romantic loss. It cut the last anchor tying Kane to the version of himself he wanted to believe he'd become. And once Lily disappeared from the frame, Kane began searching elsewhere to fill the hollow she left behind, not with peace, but with something that made him feel powerful again. Something that promised control. Phyllis stepped in at the most dangerous moment when Kane was hurt, furious, and desperate to prove he didn't need Lily in order to be right. Phyllis didn't have to drag him anywhere. She only had to offer him a narrative that fit his wound. She saw exactly what Kane needed to heart that the darkness in him wasn't a flaw, it was a weapon. That his recklessness, his ruthlessness, his willingness to play dirty weren't proof he'd failed to change, but proof he was strong enough to win. And Kane, starving for validation, clung to that encouragement like a lifeline even though it was pulling him farther from shore. Kane began to believe that partnering with Phyllis in the AI war would help him achieve his personal goals. At first, he called it strategy, a necessary move, a way to prove he could do something big instead of being the man forever begging Lily for one more chance. But the deeper he went, the harder it became to tell where the goal ended and where the addiction to being in control began. Kane brushed off every warning about consequences, because admitting risk would also mean admitting Lily had been right from the start. So he kept pushing himself forward, one step at a time, as if winning this one battle would automatically earn him forgiveness for everything else. The dirty plays Kane made under Phyllis's influence quickly ignited serious friction with Victor. The tension didn't explode in a single instant, it gathered like a storm forming in slow motion. Kane started to view Victor as a wall he had to crack to prove his worth. Phyllis treated Victor like a symbol of power that needed to be brought down. Their motives met at the same point. The more they rattled Victor, the more it felt like they were closing in on victory. And Kane began to get used to that rushed thrill of landing a hit. The satisfaction of forcing Victor to take him seriously as if Victor's attention were proof. Kane was no longer the failure Lily had already measured. But recklessness always comes with a bill. When one of Kane and Phyllis's risky plans collapsed, it didn't just mean defeat, it triggered serious legal or business fallout. The kind that could wipe out everything Kane claimed he was trying to rebuild. That's when the air around him changed. It stopped feeling like a game fueled by ambition and adrenaline, and started feeling like a hand tightening around his throat. The choices he'd labeled calculated began to look unmistakably like blind gambling. And the most frightening part wasn't Victor's rage, it was the fact that Kane could suddenly hear Lily's voice inside his head again, simple and exact. Like a nail driven into place, "You haven't changed." Doubt crept into Kane not as a beautiful awakening, but like an illness that wouldn't break. He looked back at his decisions and realized they all revolved around one obsession. Not the AI battle, not his personal objectives, but the terror of being seen too clearly. Lily had seen him before he could build the polished version of better he wanted to sell. And because he couldn't tolerate being named so accurately, he ran to Phyllis, who would amplify that very nature and call it strength. Kane began to understand he'd pushed Lily away with his own defensive instincts, then bound himself to a toxic dynamic precisely because it didn't demand real change, only demanded that he keep moving forward. Regret arrived late and cruel. Kane didn't just regret the failed plan or the fact that Victor now felt more dangerous than ever. He regretted realizing that Lily had offered him an exit from the beginning, the chance to stop, to look at himself, to choose differently. But he had treated that exit as judgment. Now that consequences had solidified into reality, he finally understood. The advice he needed most was the one he had most determined not to hear. He was trapped between two forces. On one side, the aching desire to rebuild a family that had already stepped out of reach. On the other, the dark road he'd traveled too far down to turn back easily. And in the middle stood Phyllis, unstopping, unsoftening, with no intention of giving Kane the silence he needed to save himself. Kane faced a brutal truth. If he admitted Lily was right, he had to admit he'd destroyed everything with his own hands. If he stayed with Phyllis, he had to accept that the unchanged part of him wasn't just present, it was driving. And just when he thought he'd reached the bottom of his regret, a colder realization slid down his spine in it because of Victor. But because Kane understood that some plans, once set in motion, don't allow anyone the privilege of backing out. He looked at Phyllis with new eyes, no longer an ally, but the one holding the key to a door he'd already walked through. And in that moment, Kane realized what was coming next wasn't simply another fall, it was the point where he would be forced to choose either sever this path at an unimaginable cost, or keep running with Phyllis and let Lily remain the one person who was right and the one person who would never come back. Victor accepted the deal in a way that looked like concession, but in truth it was a measured retreat meant to tighten the noose. On the surface, he listened to Jack's proposal like a seasoned man who knows when to close the book. On a negotiation, Woe knows when to reclaim a stolen asset, Matt Clark, and end a chapter of chaos. But beneath that calm was something colder. Victor wasn't taking Matt back because Matt was a bargaining chip. He was taking him back because Matt was a breach. A breach that had dared to challenge the Newman name, dared to slip outside Victor's reach, dared to make the Newman family live with the fear of secrets exposed and attacks coming from behind. To Victor, a breach like that couldn't simply be retrieved and returned to the board. It had to be locked down, severed from any path back, and most importantly made to understand exactly where power truly lives. Jack brought Matt to the Newman ranch with a confidence that bordered on triumph. The kind of confidence forged in months of pressure and the sudden belief that he'd finally found a counterpunch. In Jack's mind, this was the moment the scales could be reset. He believed he held what Victor wanted most, and like every business deal, the one delivering what Victor needed had the right to set the price. Jack didn't deliver Matt like a mere package. He delivered him carrying the certainty that Victor would honor the agreement, that no matter how ruthless Victor could be, he still operated by the logic of advantage. Because if Victor broke this, he would turn himself into someone no one could ever negotiate with, and that, Jack assumed, was a cost Victor wouldn't be willing to pay, at least not yet. Not in an exchange with too many eyes on it. Victor used that belief like a sedative. He agreed to take Matt after a deliberate consideration, long enough for Jack to think he was watching a Victor forced into a corner, a Victor choosing the least damaging option. The moment Victor nodded, Jack felt the shift, like he'd reclaimed leverage. Like he'd forced Victor to admit the Newmans couldn't always have everything their way. But it was only a feeling, a sweet illusion Victor allowed Jack to swallow whole. Victor didn't need to argue, didn't need to posture, didn't need to show anger. He only needed to provide an outcome Jack could interpret in Jack's favor, because once someone believes they've won, they lower their guard and stop asking questions. The instant Matt was handed over, Victor moved the game to a different table, one where Jack no longer had a seat. Orders went out quietly, not as a rushed reaction but like a step already mapped. As if Victor were simply pulling the exact string he'd tied long ago. Newman Security was instructed to prepare a private holding city, a prison that didn't have to look like a prison but could still erase a man from the world. No official reports. No procedural footprints. No windows for law enforcement or the press to peer through. Just a discreet Newman-controlled location sealed off from the outside, where Matt stopped being a name used in negotiations and became a problem to be handled. Matt was moved that way without noise, without public resistance. But with every mile away from the ranch, the truth inside his head began to change. At first, he could still believe he mattered. Still believe he was valuable enough to keep Jack and Victor bargaining. He might have told himself Victor needed him alive. Needed him as a condition to force Jack's concessions. But the deeper he sank into silence, the more completely he was cut off from the signals of normal life. The more he understood something terrifying. He wasn't a bargaining chip. He was the main target. Jack had delivered him to trade for the AI program. Victor had taken him to close a door. And when Victor closes a door, he never leaves it open again. Inside that isolation, Matt began to feel the kind of power Victor truly wields, power that doesn't require public declarations, headlines, or anyone's approval beyond Victor's own. It's the power to make someone vanish without leaving footprints. Matt realized Victor didn't intend to deal with him in the usual way. Victor intended to remove the possibility of him ever becoming a threat again. Not with a new agreement, not with a warning, but by stripping him of every option. For Victor, the most effective method isn't defeating an enemy in front of you, it's ensuring the enemy never gets the chance to reappear. Meanwhile, Jack returned home with the satisfaction of a man who believed he'd just flipped the board. He saw himself as the one who forced Victor to pay a price, who regained the upper hand in the AI war. Jack might even feel relief, even pride, not only because Matt had been returned to Newman control, But because the moment itself convinced Jack he was still sharp enough to stand against Victor. Yet that relief carried a dangerous undertone. It made Jack stop auditing the small details. Stop distrusting the pauses. Stop asking why Victor had agreed so easily. Sometimes the sensation of victory isn't a reward, it's the trap. And that's where the real tension lies. It doesn't detonate immediately. There is no single slap of truth, no alarm bell loud enough for Jack to realize he's been outplayed. Everything remains smooth on the surface. Mitt is back with Newman. The agreement seems complete. Jack has every reason to believe Victor wouldn't be foolish enough to break his word right now. But in a sealed corner Jack cannot see, Victor already holds total control of Matt, and that control isn't only about Matt. It is also an invisible reminder to Jack in the Newman world. The only person allowed to believe he's winning is the one Victor permits. The ending lives in the silence after the deal. Jack keeps moving forward with the belief that he has gained strategic advantage, that Victor finally had to bend. Victor doesn't need to prove anything, only needs time to turn agreement into an outcome no one can reverse. And Matt, in a place where no one speaks his name, begins to understand the rules have changed. And the new rules contain no clause for negotiation. What makes it unsettling is that none of the three men truly knows when the truth will finally break the surface, when Jack will realize the deal was only a shell, when Victor will be forced to pay for the way he controls, or when Matt will find a crack big enough to disappear in a different way. And perhaps the most frightening part is the sense that nothing has ended at all. It has only quietly shifted into a phase where even the winner may not be able to control every last consequence.